When last we left Amina, she had completed her mission. She found her friend and shipmate's child, and she had completed her additional mission, which was keeping a powerful magical object, the Moon of Saba, out of the Franks' hands. And she had actually abandoned her husband, Raksh, on a floating platform in the middle of the ocean and made it back to her daughter, Marjana. Now we are in for a new adventure. Hello, my name is Dakota, and this is UpperPen. I am talking with Shannon Chakraborty about that new adventure in the Tapestry of Fate. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
For folks who might not have heard of what the Tapestry of Fate is about yet, do you have a little rundown?
Yes, so the Tapestry of Fate, we see Amina going after an additional transgression. I won't say second, but she is still working to fulfill her deal with the Perrys to track down forbidden magical artifacts while attempting to have some work-life balance and raise her daughter as well. And I would say the Tapestry of Fate sees both of those fail.
Let's start with the first failure where
Yes.
Raksh actually finds her.
Yeah.
So who is Raksh and what is his deal?
So I think I can answer one of those. Raksh is Amina's fourth husband. She tends to collect and divorce them. And he is what we learned in the first book is a spirit of discord. And Amina and Jamal and all of the other people who are even aware of magic in this world have no idea what that is. Raksh seems to be something just deeply other, very old, very mysterious. Which I think paints him in sort of like this brooding, shadowy figure, but he's not. He's essentially like a deeply cowardly, selfish, uh, almost elemental creature who just survives off of ambition. And the making of legends. I had the idea that he's essentially something of like a muse and a vampire all in one. Uh, so yes, she does not want to have anything to do with him, mostly because they have a child together, which she has kept from him, and she doesn't want him to know about their daughter because I don't think you'd want a creature I just described as a deeply violent, selfish coward to know about the child you share. So she is still keeping him at arm's length, but unfortunately, he has riled up the Perrys with whom she has made this deal. So they're both sort of racing to go after this magical artifact, which is said to be a spindle that can unmake and rewrite fate.
And that is such a big tale, right? So spindles come up a lot in folklore, and it's such a strange thing because it's such a common household item of the time.
Yes, and it was interesting when I first started conceiving, what would be the next transgression, right? I'm a fantasy writer. What am I going to think of? Like a cursed weapon, like, a mirror that lets you see the future. But I also love history, and I don't even remember how it came to my attention, but I was listening to an audiobook on the history of textile production, and they were just talking about how it's so ordinary and commonplace, we don't even think about it anymore. You learn about big archaeological digs, people are like, oh, they had a sword or they had fancy jewelry, and you ignore the fact that there's thousands of loom weights at the site. There was another line in the book. This was the one that made me stop and sit up. And they were talking about how what makes a job woman's work. And it's something that is essentially you don't go far, it can be easily interrupted and it's not dangerous. So it's something compatible with the idea of raising young children. And I was thinking about this on maternity leave. I already have an older one who likes to interrupt, especially if it's dangerous. So it was just something that made me laugh. So much of this story and this series is meant to be about recovering women's voices and mothers' voices that I thought immediately I have to do something with textile history. And from that, it kind of just took off this whole momentum of its own because, as you say, the idea of a spindle is just so prevalent in folklore. I mean,
Yeah.
pretty much every culture has some sort of myth or deity around spinning. You don't just make cloth, you spin stories, you spin tales, but it's just so commonplace. I mean, I think about just 100 years ago, the idea, probably more than 100 years ago, because Technology advanced more than that. Just the idea we would have all learned to spin as children. We would have constantly been making cloth, making thread. It was just everything from your sails to your blankets to your clothes. It was all just so time consuming of a task. So I really wanted to come up with a way to just like dig into the meat of all this, of this telling of tales, this recovering of women's traditions, and see if I could come up with an artifact that really pulled that all together.
It's funny though, because Amina is one of the least stereotypical women of the time, right? Like
Yes.
she does this very male heavy profession. She was a pirate. Um, and it but she is a mother, and that's a heavy theme in the books.
Yes, it's a very heavy theme in the book. It's one of those themes that I joke sometimes with my husband. I'm like, every time I finish a book, like a year after I've written it, not really thought about it, I'll be in an interview and they'll ask me a question. And I'll be like, wow, probably should have seen a therapist about that instead of writing it into a novel that's now being consumed by thousands of people. Um, but yes, so motherhood is a big aspect of it. I think parenthood in general, because I wanted this series to be adventurous and fun, but I was also writing for my peer group in a way. That's why the character is in her 40s. I'm 40. That's why the character has a child. I have a child. And we typically, mothers usually just die in fantasy. Like, that's almost a stereotypical thing now. So I wanted a story that really, first of all, continues to say, hey, parents, you can continue to have adventures. If anything, I think it makes the story richer. You have so much more to lose. But so like to play with that idea of not just kind of like throw it aside, oh, she's a mother, so it's something she, has her kid and walks off, but like how that would really affect how she makes decisions, what she thinks about, because it's not something you can just leave at the door.
You see this a lot in the first book in particular, where she's struggling, like, I shouldn't have left Marjana, like it's wrong of me to have left, but is it wrong to have a life? So,
And I think there's no easy answer to that. I kind of mean the whole series to play with that. Because in the first book, it ends on kind of the note of like, hey, maybe I can have it all. That's the phrase we're taught, right?
yeah.
And then the second book sees that go awry. Her family is rightfully like, why do we have to hide out here while you sail all over the Indian Ocean? Her daughter starts to have questions. I thought you were just like a ship's captain and sold things. Why do you have chests of weapons? Why do strange things happen to me? Her daughter is finding out her own magical heritage and has no idea what's going on. So I kind of that starts to fray in the second book. I don't want to spoil the end, but wow, does the idea that you can have it all have a very severe cost. And then that's something that we then fully go back into in the third book of just like, what happens when you make choices that have consequences that you'll never get back.
Yeah. I feel like this is a common thread with people who have like military jobs, or people who are gone a lot of the time from their children. You do miss a lot, and then
Yeah.
they are sometimes resentful for that. So that's like a tension that feels to pull a lot in the
Yeah.
second book.
Yes, and I very much wanted to explore that because I think, it's the kind of idea sometimes you do have to make choices and they can have consequences. And I didn't want my character to be able to sort of just like, la la la, I'm an adventure fantasy pirate. Nothing I do matters. It does matter.
So that kind of brings up Marjana. She's grown up very sheltered, and at this point she is, I don't want to say angry, but she wants to know what is happening and why. Why would Amina keep her in the dark this long?
I think it's the same thing about sometimes you make bad choices. It's just funny you say this because I'm exploring some of these questions in the third book and I'm trying very hard not to like spoil things.
Yeah.
But It's the idea, I think, in the first book, we find out that she has left a life of criminality, being a pirate, a smuggler, doing some very bad things. And she's essentially been away from that for 10 years. And she has sort of refound herself. She's recommitted herself to her faith. She's committed herself to her child. And I think she very much just put that past aside and was like in survivor mode. Like, I well, I can spoil the first book, but it ends when she leaves for retirement. Things have gone terribly awry. She's had to essentially kill her best friend, as he turns into a zombie. Her husband, she learns, is this, like malevolent magical spirit, and bam, you're pregnant. So it's kind of like I think she just picks up the pieces and tries to fix her life and just doesn't want to think anything about the past, doesn't want to even contemplate the idea that her daughter could have any of her husband in her, and just goes with that. And it's kind of like once you've raised your child a certain way, I mean, I think this is unfortunately a timely topic. How do you tell your child who you love, who's innocent, the world is a terrible place? It's really terrible place. And some of that terribleness might be in you or infecting you. And I think the way that Amina does it is she doesn't. She's just kind of like, like it's fine, I'll fix it. You don't need to know that. You don't need to know that. I also did want to kind of play with the idea that like I'm writing in a very different time and place. This is the medieval period. Children aren't really raised to, question their parents, especially, a kid who's kind of quiet and everything. Like Amina very much has this head of household attitude with her family. So I kind of wanted to have the idea that like, in the second book, yes, you're starting to get some preteen snark, but that, preteen snark looks very different in the 1140s.
That's the other thing is you do so much to set the reader in the time and place because it is so vastly different than what most Americans know, historically speaking. Is that difficult to manage? Like, do you feel like you have to pull back in places?
Yes and no. I mean, this is a huge question, just the whole framework of the novel, because I really wanted it to be just as historically plausible as possible from their jobs, their clothing, that everything that surrounds them, the ships they sail. But you have to there's of course room for imagination in that. And it's interesting because I got inspired by a lot of first person narratives, they're travelogues. And but so I can hear, the voice of this male scholar or this male commercial person, but there's also women in that. I mean, there's a lot of like legal cases, women will write to the courts about their marriage, their lives. And very often those voices are so much more full of color and humor than I think people realize. And I cannot say what that looks like outside of the time and place I study. I got this question in another interview, and I was joking. I was like, I don't know, there's something about this period. Like for me, like feudal Europe, those lives seem very different.
Yeah.
Whereas like a lot of this is, like a lot of these, they're living in cities. They're living, like if they have complaints, they're going to the law clerk. If they have, they have jobs in the bureaucracy. There's some familiarity with a lot of this urban life that I think continues to have echoes in the modern period. And very much in some of these narratives, those voices feel that way to me. I mean, they're full of life. They're funny. These people are sarcastic. They're rude. They're profane. They mourn when their cousin is dies in a shipwreck, and they write it. It's a very human experience. So it's been a balancing of okay, here are the parts where it's really foreign, like whoa. The narrative was like this guy's telling a joke, and all of a sudden there's people impaled on the city gates. God forbid, like we don't usually do that in New York City. And so there are aspects that are very different, and I think it's playing with it. It's kind of letting that attitude shine in certain places, and then maybe you make the language kind of reflect, okay, how do I think of a joking, sarcastic middle-aged criminal would sound? Like there has to be a play with maybe I might be some of the phrases and everything that they use in these medieval narratives. How can we bring that back to sort of more common English.
a lot of this is helped by the fact that you frame everything through Jamal's narratives,
Mhm.
and the writing. And I'm so thrilled that this continued into the second book, and I'm assuming it continues through all of them.
Yeah.
But it works so well to kind of sit down and take a step back and explain kind of like what we might not understand.
Yeah. Well, thank
Uh,
you. I wanted it to feel like it was somebody who had just like roped this scholar in like in a tavern and she's just, there's sea tales. That's
yeah.
sailors' yarns, right? This is a whole thing we have. I wanted to have that feeling where like she explains some things, other times she just leaves him in the dark. That kind of attitude.
And there are always like funny quips in these off sections with Amina and Jamal kind of like, well, are you going to let me tell it? Or are you going to tell it? Like, so there's a lot of character there in those.
Oh, thank you.
This new book, when it releases, will the audiobook release at the same time?
It should. I think that's one of those things in publishing I'm not so
Yeah.
super aware of, but I think they do. I mean, audio has just gotten to be a huge format. The audiobook of Amina al-Sirafi is fantastic. It's a very well done production. The voice actors are fabulous. So I have to imagine they're probably releasing it at the same time.
Is it the same people?
I don't have confirmation on that yet. I
Yeah.
really hope so. It's interesting. Audio is one of those things that's like very late to production. Like at the time of this speaking, I mean, the book comes out in 2 months, and they're like, there's a third point of view in the Tapestry of Fate, and I just received like some samples of voice actors for that, and which was exciting. And then the other part of me is like, wow, this book's coming out really soon. But
I presume you've written it a while ago and just now we're
yeah,
getting to the publishing.
yes, that's true. Yes, I finished it last summer.
That's always got to be so strange, that the distance between finishing and publishing.
It really is, especially this time around. I'm normally either one, really slow writer, or two, just completely delayed by life events. This is going to be the first time in a while that when this book comes out, I've written like God willing, like 75% of the third book. And I've been involved in the research for even longer. It's a whole different historical niche. So it's very strange to me because I haven't this is the real time where I'm like, my head is in a different book, my research is in a different book, and now I'm gonna go and promote this other book and try not to spoil the end of everything.
You walk a very fine rope. But kind of going back to the story of this, the I don't want to say antagonists, but the people who are kind of pushing the story are the Paris, or the I'm not sure how to say it.
The
I think
Perrys.
that's yeah.
Yeah.
So who are they and what are they doing in the Tapestry of Fate?
So the idea in this story is that the Peris are elemental creatures of the air. They are derived from, I can't even just call it Islamic folklore because it's very expansive folklore. There's stories of them in earlier Persian tales. There's related to like ideas in mythology in Central Asian stories. But essentially you have, it's a winged thing. It's a winged magical thing. And in my world, they are very judgmental. They're very powerful, very long-lived. They have very firm opinions that, the magical elemental races should all stay apart. Humans should have no magic, and that they know everything. They know better, of course. And they've made a deal with Amina, sort of unwillingly, that if she tracks down these transgressions, these artifacts, they won't punish her for having landed on their island and come and been blessed with magic herself. So in this book, again, I'm like, how do I not spoil things? They want her to get rid of a transgression that I think has plagued them for a very long time, and one that makes them afraid, and one that they can't themselves touch. And I'll say that much.
This transgression is more I would say, hopefully this isn't spoily, but it's more like human-y. It seems like the Moon of Saba was also very much a human type of deal. So
Yeah.
they're just not interfering a lot because this touches the humans, and they are very like, no, thank you."
Yes, I wanted the idea that they believe magic is forbidden for humans.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're not really supposed to interfere with humans or hurt them directly. So it puts them in a difficult position where they see these artifacts, especially ones that can hurt them, or ones that enable humans and mortals to get powerful enough to threaten them. Well, we have to find a creative way to get rid of that. And in the Tapestry of Fate, they have found a very creative way to get rid of that.
Yeah, so we'll move away from this so because we're getting close to the meat of the story. You also encounter, we'll call them a sorceress. That's
Yeah.
the whole point of the book. But on your Instagram, you brought up a fun anecdote that this kind of reminds you of Circe. Is that who it was? Um,
Yes, so this is fascinating to me, and I'm going to keep talking about this publicly because I've reached out to other scholars and nobody quite has an answer. And I want somebody somewhere must have done some academic work on this. But yes, so the main antagonist of this novel is derived from an extremely side note villain in an old medieval Arabic tale called Junor of the Sea. And it shows up in the Thousand and One Nights. It shows up in some other collections. And I retell the story in Tapestry, so I won't give it entirely away. But my Queen Lab, the witch, is a character in this story. She's a witch in the tale, and I mean, I can tell this enough. It comes up. She's a witch. She is, of course, a sexy, powerful witch who lives isolated on this island, and she turns men that she doesn't like into livestock. And of course, you read that. I mean, this is not entirely uncommon ideas, but when I read that, I thought to myself immediately, I'm like, this is Circe. This is like who do these stories come up independently? They may, that's very possible,
yeah.
but at the same time, so many of these medieval tales are derived from tales of antiquity. And most of them more so tend to be from India, from China, from points further south and further east, but they would have been familiar with the tales from the Greek pantheon. I had that I do know. I had checked. I wanted to see if I could talk about Hercules a little and found a scholar, and they're like, yes, they would have absolutely been familiar, and you can see some influence from those stories, right? So I don't have the good answer on, nobody's done academic work that I can read on Jolnor of the Sea, which is surprising because it also is said to have inspired The Little Mermaid. So someone out there, like a doctoral student, please take this idea and run with it and go study this story and find out who made it up and the roots of it. But yes, that is my antagonist. So she has similarities to a lot of different witches in history. And I kind of played with that idea in the novel of like she's this incredibly long-lived being. She has lived many different manifestations. So it's kind of like, who is to say where a story originated, right? Like maybe there's manifestation here, there's another manifestation here. Is that purposeful, that sort of scattering of tales?
It's also the pantheon of, or like the breadth of Islamic folklore is vast.
Yeah.
You are going, this is an incredibly large physical area, to say the least, but it also lasts a very long breadth of time. So of course, to me, it seems like there would be a lot of meshing and a lot of like bringing in of other cultures and ideas and thoughts because they were very widespread, right? That makes
Yes.
sense.
And I think we tend to think in our like modern age, everything was sort of set in stone. Whereas not at all. People had their tales, but they had very different versions of them, and that's kind of amazing. When I was first doing the research for the first book, in one of the travelogues I was reading, and it's written by he wants to call himself a scholar. He's really more a businessman who tells some of the most perverted story like I have ever read in a text in my life. But anyway, he's traveling in the region in the 12th century, and he talks about how there is an island right outside Aden in Yemen, and that the local Indian population, because people have always been traveling and mixing and living, referred to that as the island of normally in the Ramayana, that's like the old, I'm gonna just jump into the other, if you're familiar with like the biggest epic tales of Hinduism, the Ramayana is one of two, and traditionally, of course, always the island that Sita is taken to is Sri Lanka or Lanka. And in this story, in the 1200s, he's talking to Indian travelers, and they're pointing to an island outside Yemen and saying, "No, that's where she was taken." And I remember reading that, and I loved it because it's just a true idea of one that we've human beings have just been traveling and interacting with each other for so much longer than we think. And two, some of those stories get lost and they offer a very interesting different idea on our own, you know, fables, our own religious lore that we always think is already so set and determined.
I just find the lore and the folklore behind these your stories in particular so vast, and it feels like you care about these older stories.
I do. It's funny. My thing was I wanted to be a historian before I wanted to be a writer, and I was really interested in exactly the Indian Ocean Islamic sphere, what formed it, what the cultural influences were. So the fact that I can write these books now and continue to find new ways that these stories can be told, I love it. I'm a very fortunate woman.
The only thing that I get confused about, and it's not you, it's honestly me, is I don't know where we are sometimes because I'm like, I don't know these names.
Yeah, the book takes place, and we fixed this between my husband and I in the first book. There's an eclipse, and the two of us painstakingly, because neither of us know astronomy very well, went to look about how there would have when the moon would have been in this lunar mansion and when would have been an eclipse, and we worked out that the book should take place in 1144. So
That is very specific.
yes, it's very specific. It works though because I wanted the fall of Jerusalem to the Crusaders is supposed to have happened, but not super recently. So you had the idea that that could still be in memory, but it wouldn't have happened, say, 10 years ago.
So you are doing more in the Amina world, right? Like you've already worked on book three. Is there going to be more after that?
And not at this time.
Okay.
I intend it to be a trilogy. I intended to have a pretty firm ending. I mean, I think not it's not like an everybody dies ending, but it's an ending for me for this trilogy and for this world. I think for a while.
Okay.
Even the Daevabad trilogy kind of plays in the same similar world, and I think after the third Amina book, I'm gonna kind of try to step away for a bit.
So with the Daevabad trilogy, you had the River of Silver, which collected a bunch of different
Yes.
stories together. Do you think you'll do something similar here?
I don't know. I kind of like the idea of maybe working on some stories that I put in a newsletter. I
Okay.
don't think I'll do, the River of Silver kind of came from me trying to write in a pandemic. So it was a very long stretch of time that I was like, I don't know what I'm doing with anything. So I had time to write different stories. Whereas with this, I'm actually quite eager to try my hand at a new project, and I'm not a fast writer. I try to balance work with the care of my children, so I don't know that I would have time to put together a short story collection. Of course, now that you've asked that, I will end up like to be like, but I had ideas. So never say never.
I always just want more of Dalila, like
Yes, well, she plays a big role in the second book. So
yes, she does. What do you have against Tinbu, by the way? Why do you hurt him so much?
I don't hurt him. Trying to think what happens to him in the second book. Is he hurt in the second book?
No, I don't think he actually physically gets hurt, but
Yes, the third book he shows up a bit more, and we he'll be okay.
I really like him though. He's like this perfect little he's almost like a palate cleanser to Amina and Dalila, who are always like focused or want to murder something.
You know what? It's funny that you say that because I remember like just talking out brainstorming stuff like with my husband is like my beta reader slash stories. We always talk these things out. And I was saying I had a hard time coming up with a good arc for Tinbu because he's happy and largely satisfied and happy, satisfied. Like he's like living the life. I'm like, like I'm kind of a half pirate. I've got a cute side piece. I've got a nice cat. Like, like my boss is out of her mind, but but we're friends. Like, like he's pretty content, and it's hard to write stories about content people.
Well, because he has no motivation to do anything but what he's doing, you know?
Yeah, he's happy with his life.
Aside from following Amina to whatever disastrous thing she's doing
Yes.
next.
Yeah. Well, you will find out in book three. His heart's kind of hurt.
Oh,
But
see, you hurt him all the time. The Tapestry of Fate is actually kind of interesting because you're doing a book tour, which you've not done yet, correct?
no, I've never done a book tour. I did like a couple events when my first book came out back in 2017. But then, just like spread it, be like, let me do a launch party. But I didn't do a book tour. And I think they were hoping to do one for Empire of Gold. And that came out 2 months into the pandemic. And Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi came out when I was in the hospital. So after a very sort of long, dangerous pregnancy, so there were no events. So this is the first time I'm doing one, and it's the first time I'm really kind of getting back sort of in the saddle of doing public events. So I'm excited.
It's super cool because you're going to be doing quite a few of them, right? And most of them
Yeah.
are, I would say Midwest to East Coast, but there's a
Yes, I think
few.
I'm like, I guess I'm not allowed to cross the Mississippi River. But yeah, so they're pretty much all like on the eastern half of the country.
Well, I mean, to be fair, aren't you located on the eastern half of
Yes,
the
yes. I
country?
live outside New York City, so that is helpful. The travel seems slightly daunting. I'm like, how does that work? You're in a different city every day.
I was looking on your Instagram because I was like, oh, there are special editions of the Tapestry of Fate that are coming out because there were special editions of Amina al-Sirafi.
Yeah.
Um, but it sounds like the signed copies for the Barnes and Noble ones have already sold out.
Yeah, they sold out in like a week. So
That
maybe
is
hopefully we'll do more next time around.
that is crazy awesome though. Like
Yes, yeah. I mean, it was like a limited number to begin with. But we'll see. It's interesting because The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi came out in 2023, and sort of this craze for special editions and sprayed edges and all of these things, it just didn't exist.
Mhm.
So we didn't have much for the first. I think we had like one with Fairy Loot. And now it's like it falls into this weird crack of people are like, well, what about this? Are there going to be more special editions? And I'm like, no, there's not. Sorry.
The only thing that
But
so there's a couple things that bother me about the special editions, but there's like exclusive content in some of them, and they're
yeah,
usually exclusive to like pre-orders or people who are on special lists to purchase these.
yeah.
And then I get frustrated because I'm like, why do you deserve a special story?
I mean, I'm an old, like for myself, I'm an old like mass market
Yeah.
library person. I would rather see the book in more hands than like the special editions. I mean, I think I was joking when I came back from maternity leave. They were like, "We're going to do a special diff in a City Brass," and I was like, "That sounds great. I don't know why, but go with it." And it's gonna have sprayed edges. And I just remember seeing this email. I was like, "What the hell is a sprayed edge?" Like, and I had to email, and there was like something, a case slip or something else. I was like, listen, just please talk to me like I'm old and I'm not on TikTok and explain to me in slow words what this means and what you require from me. You know?
So
But I mean, people love them. So like if
yeah.
that's your jam, like listen, life is short. Go get your special book. But yeah, I like the every exclusive chapters and scenes to like find their way to be read by other
Yeah.
people.
Well, I have special editions, but they're ones I don't touch. And I'm like, that doesn't feel right to me to have a book that you don't physically touch or read, you know? Like,
You're talking about I dog ear my books.
yeah. I
Yeah.
don't want these to be so precious that I can't
Yeah.
read them.
Yeah.
So,
I agree.
so the other bit of bigger news that you shared on social media is you have a new book deal coming or set in stone. I'm not sure.
Yes. No, I have a new book deal. Contract is signed, so I was allowed to talk about it. And yes, I'm going to be publishing two standalones with Harper Voyager again. I don't have too much more on what they'll be. I will be finishing Amina for the third Amina book first. So people don't have to worry that I'm like, gonna take more time. That's not happening. But yeah, I'm gonna write two standalones. They are not going to be set in the world of either Devabad or Amina. I really kind of wanted like a creative break to either go into secondary world fantasy and sort of be able to toy with politics and magic and religion in a way I don't really feel comfortable doing with a real world setting.
Yeah.
Um, I've been like really obsessed with the Bronze Age in the past few years. So I'd love to set a story earlier in time. I was joking, I was like, I keep going back further in time. So I don't know at what point this ends. They're like, it's like Shannon Chakraborty does Clan of the Cave Bears. Um, but so yes, I'll be doing two standalones after the Amina trilogy is done.
Do you think it's going to be difficult to do a standalone after doing two trilogies?
Um, I have a couple ideas, and some of them don't seem difficult. I have
Okay.
a political fantasy in my head that I could think of. I'm like, that might be difficult to tackle in one book. But I'm very like intrigued by the challenge. Series work it's great because I love writing character work and I love writing characters that people fall in love with and want to follow across multiple books. But you get to the point where like, I remember when I was writing the end of Empire of Gold. And I had started the City of Brass 10 years earlier. And like once that's done and published, you can't change things about that. You can't be like, oh, it would have been really easier if I could just have. And that kind of it's interesting. That's its own creative challenge of like well, you have certain parameters you have to work in. But I sort of don't want parameters. I kind of just want to throw something out there and write something very new with new characters and new worlds and really kind of then put it out there and then try to do that again.
I think it's going to be very fun. Like, I love reading everything you write, so like I'm down.
Thank you.
The other thing that was a bit fantastic for you is in your little press release, it says it's a seven-figure deal for these two books. Damn, woman.
Yeah, I didn't know they weren't going to include that. I was like,
That's
that's some
wonderful
evil
though.
eye stuff right there. But okay, thank you. No, I'm
Is
very fortunate.
is that more than you would typically see for books, or is that like
I don't really know.
okay.
I kind of leave the whole business of publishing sometimes just completely aside because if you start to really think about it, it will be paralyzing and you won't be able to work.
Yeah, that's
Um,
fair.
Yes, so we'll see. Like I'm kind of daunted because I write like sort of some of my stuff I feel like is niche or like like very like I get in the weeds with my historical research and I hope I can carry enough people into those weeds to justify that price point. But we'll find out.
I think
I
you'll
got
do
kids to put through
fine.
college. I'm not going to complain.
But it also does take a little bit to write these books just because they're so
Yes.
lengthy. So I can see the amount of time playing into that number, if that makes
Yes,
sense.
we negotiate, they publishers a lot of times they like to have you do like a book a year. I was
Yeah.
like, I can't do a book a year. Like it's just not possible.
But the books are so detailed, like I would expect you to have like it feels like they're very well researched. If
Thank you. It justifies the level of insanity sometimes.
well, I also love the further reading in them that you include because I'm like, oh, well, now
Yeah.
I have more things to do.
And I love that. Like I said, I wanted to be a professor. So this is I love being able to just intrigue people enough to want to read more.
Yeah.
To find out just about more of these fascinating people and these fascinating places, and just like here, you like this? Go read all of these things. Like you'll then come to my events and we can nerd out together.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me today.
No, thank you for having me.
If anybody listening or watching has enjoyed this conversation, please like and rate or follow or subscribe and leave me a comment. Let me know what you like about Shannon Chakraborty's books. But I love hearing from people about the books that they like, where they buy their book. The Tapestry of Fate is out May 12th, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And the best place that people can follow you or know what you're doing is maybe your newsletter.
Yes, probably my newsletter and or Instagram.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm not really
perfect.
anywhere else, but.
Clearly, I follow your Instagram and follow your newsletter. So
Well, thank you.
thank you again so much. It was wonderful talking with you.
Yes, you too.
I hope everybody out there has a lovely, lovely day. Bye.
Bye.